This is Stefan Trömmel, Senior Disability Specialist here in the ILO. We're extremely excited by the webinar that we are organizing. I will provide a few logistical comments at the beginning and a few introductory remarks, and then I will pass on the floor to our five panelists. On the logistics, please be aware that you can use the captioning option. There should be a button at the lower part of your screen where it should say closed caption, and there you can activate or deactivate the captions which are in English. We are also recording the webinar, and we will share the record with all of you and any other person that has expressed interest in listening to it. You will be able to, and some of you have already been doing it, you will be able to send questions and answers to us. We will be filtering those, and we will make the utmost to bring those questions back to the panelists. And also, if there are any questions that have been raised which we have not been able to deal with during the webinar, we will take careful note of them, and we will come back to all of you with those questions and an attempt to answer them. We had 330 people registered by this morning, 200 of which had registered since Sunday. And I'm just seeing right now that the figures of people that are actually listening right now are close to 250. So this is definitely the webinar that we've been organizing that has attracted the highest level of attention. We have scheduled the webinar to last for 1 hour, but if need be, we have also arranged with the captionist, we could go beyond the 1 hour if need be, and in order to sort of accommodate as much as possible the questions that we are getting. You all have been put on mute. I will be moderating and I will only be unmuting the different speakers. As I said, any other interaction in view of particularly of the very large number of participants will need to happen through the Q&A section. You will have a button on the lower part of your screen which says Q&A. Some of you are already using that. Let me, before passing on the floor to the five speakers, and you can see on the screen, or could see probably before the different speakers, I want to make a few introductory remarks. I think it's fair to say that, personally at least, I have extremely mixed feelings about the current situation. On a positive side, we are better off than before. If this same crisis would have caught us 10 years ago, where there was much less attention to persons with disabilities at the global and national level, much less attention to persons with disabilities in the corporate sector, we would have been even worse. So we are now in a much better situation. Persons with disabilities are much higher on all the agendas, policymakers, the UN at national level, and also in particular in the corporate sector. So from that point of view, a positive note. However, it's also fair to say that the awareness on persons with disabilities is still very low. Prejudice and stigma are still extremely prevalent. Many people still question the quality of life of persons with disabilities. And that is particularly dangerous in a context now where sometimes access to health is graduated, it's not available there for everybody, and people can come to the conclusion, and are coming to the conclusion in some cases, that persons, for instance, with very severe disabilities should not have access to life-saving operations. When we look, and that's the look we will take, when we look at the area of work, there's still a very high prevalence of people that think that people with disabilities cannot work, or definitely cannot work like others. So why should we pay particular attention to persons with disabilities in this context? Why should we continue to promote their entry into the labor market? So we need to see, and I think it depends on the day, that some days when we are more pessimistic and some days we are more optimistic. And we will hear from our speakers, especially our colleagues from China, we will hear from IBM, we will hear from our colleague in the UK, examples of how companies and other stakeholders have been addressing this issue in a positive way. But the main message I think that we need to, would like to convey with this webinar is we cannot just sit back. We cannot just hope that because people with disabilities should not be excluded because there is, we are all convinced about social justice, because there is this message coming from the UN on leave no one behind. We cannot just expect that this will happen automatically. No? And this is, to some extent, the reason for the webinar today. It's really like an urgent appeal for attention and action addressed to all relevant stakeholders, reminding them that in the answers to this crisis, in the short-term answers, and we will hear about some of the things that companies and others can do in the short term, but even more importantly, in the responses that will need to come very soon and are starting to come to address the economic crisis that is unfolding, we need to make persons with disabilities a key player in those processes. We need to make sure that people with disabilities will not be overrepresented among those that will lose their jobs, etc., etc. Of course, many people will lose their jobs, and many of them will be persons with disabilities. But we need to make sure that persons with disabilities are not overrepresented in that situation. So when you think about questions that you would like to ask the panel, ourselves, please also think about recommendations that you would like to make to us and to others listening in the call. Recommendations for action. What more do we need to do with this double component? The short term, which is probably a bit easier because we all know exactly more or less what we can do at the short term, but also thinking of this midterm, because what we can already see, I've seen on the platform of the World Economic Forum, people are already, of course, concerned about the health crisis, but more and more are concerned about the economic crisis, which is unfolding. Surveys from my own country, from Spain, show that 50% of the population, the working age population, is concerned about losing their job as a result of this crisis. So that's why I'm saying we need to look at the short term, but also more importantly, we need to look at the midterm, and we need to raise the disability flag in all of these contexts. We need to come up with our recommendations, but we need really to infiltrate the mainstream discussions that are happening around COVID-19, both in the short term and in the midterm. So I wanted to share these reflections. And now, without further ado, and really thanking the 5 speakers, we had to organize this webinar on a very short time frame. But it was amazing how when we reached out to colleagues and suggested them to be part of this, they were all immediately available and will definitely make a huge contribution to our webinar. So I will start by giving the floor to Federico Negro. He's a colleague in the ILO, and he's the head of the coordination support unit for peace and resilience. And the ILO has asked him and the colleagues in his department to try to help us, to help the ILO to identify the immediate actions that the ILO and its partners need to do in the context of the COVID-19. So I will turn off the video myself, I will mute myself, and I will now ask, and I will now unmute Federico for Federico to come in. Federico, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and good afternoon or good morning, colleagues, depending where you are. So I will just have, as requested, I will do a very short presentation on 2 main topics. First of all, providing some information about the ILO response to what is becoming or is already a socio-economic crisis. And also a very quick introduction on the topic of the webinar today, which is the disability inclusiveness in the crisis response. First of all, let me start by saying that the pandemic rapidly caused economic and labor market shocks that we all see, and which are obviously consequences of the restrictions imposed by the different countries, but definitely the impact on both the supply and demands of goods and services is severe, and that's why the work and the involvement of an organization such as the ILO is very much relevant. Unfortunately, we have to say, but the relevance of our work in estimating, analyzing the impact, the socioeconomic impacts of the consequence of this pandemic is fundamental, but it's also very important that the organization puts together some policy responses that they are needed at all levels. And this is actually what the office from the very beginning of this crisis has been doing. It goes without saying that the focus in such crises, the relevance of the social dialogue remains fundamental. And in this case, particularly, the role that the tripartite constituents can play is major in sort of striking the balance between, from one side, protecting health of workers in the workplace, and of course, no compromise can be accepted on that one. But at the same time, trying, as Stefan just mentioned, to have always a look at the long term. So what's happening next? Are consequences of this crisis that can be protracted having an even stronger impact into society? So definitely role of our office is fundamental. To at least try to minimize, because we cannot avoid, but minimize the impact on job losses that have a direct consequence on society as a whole. The ILO has been putting together a note that you may have seen on the web, developing some scenarios about the impact on employment and unemployment. Of course, the impact of the crisis is higher and higher every day more. So the ILO is continually working. There is a good number of specialists from different technical areas that they form a task team, and they are working to come up with a new estimation that are very relevant in order to inform policy areas at sectoral level, at any level, employment policy level, what to do to cope with this crisis. But as I said, the second point, because I have about 5 minutes, the second point, and to dive into the issue that we are discussing today that attracted so many people, and no wonder, is the how we ensure that in whatever we do, not only as ILO, of course, as all, how do we ensure the inclusiveness in the crisis response of the disability issues or issues pertaining to disabled persons? You know, this is not new, and Stefan, you mentioned it in your introductory remarks. This is not new to the ILO, luckily, so we are not starting from scratch, which is already very positive. You know, the inclusion of persons with disability has been in crisis response, including is documented, for instance, in a guide that we developed in the ILO in 2016. But more importantly, it is included in the recommendation 205, which is the employment and decent work for peace and resilience, adopted by the ILC in 2017, so a few years back, where the protection, this recommendation provides specific support for, just hold on a second because I missed them. I want to mention this correctly. So the places specific attention to persons and groups who were made particularly vulnerable by the crisis. This is fundamental to keep in mind because disabled people are included in this group, but it's not about just a general recommendation. This is where we go into concrete stuff. So the member states are actually requested by the recommendation to conduct employment impact assessment that include a focus on the specific needs of this part of the population, adapting specific measures, including for single-headed households, all that is important and relevant to tackle in a specific way. Developing and applying active labor market policies that they are also to the benefit of all, so inclusiveness there, and also, of course, protecting labor rights for all. And when we say for all, we include all, and we have to include all. Also, very important is the fact that there is always some work to be done, which is to combat the discrimination and prejudice. So it's not only inclusion, but also ensuring that we include properly, and any discrimination and prejudice is, the crisis response is an opportunity to tackle. Voila, and so this is a reference that is, at the highest level. The recommendation provides clear indication on that, and it's a way. It paves the way really for a practical implementation then at the country level or at global level when we send policy messages. So I encourage to start from here and ensuring that whatever information we provide, whatever policy we suggest, we work for disability inclusiveness in our work. Over to you, Sela.
Thank you very much, Federico. Very important points. I will now ask our second speaker, Haibin Zhou, from our colleague from China. Haibin, you have a PowerPoint. Haibin is the coordinator of the China chapter of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network. He's also not only a good friend, but also an ex-colleague from the ILO. And Haibin has been particularly active in this because, in fact, Haibin and his family come from Wuhan, which, as you know, has been the place where COVID started to appear, and which means that he has been dealing with this issue longer than many others, and has been particularly active in trying to come up with solutions that could benefit persons with disabilities in these particularly challenging moments. So I think it's always good to hear these stories, how people sort of make the most out of very complicated situations. Haibin, over to you.
Okay, Stefan, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Thank you, everyone. And yes, just 2 days before Wuhan city is shut down, I was in the city, and just 1 day before that, my wife and my parents just left the Wuhan city to avoid the confusion, and also we don't want to start in the city. And actually, after I left the city, I'm still very anxious about the future, and after that, the whole country is kind of in a very big crisis. At least people don't know what's the result, what's the future, and people with disability is definitely quite vulnerable in that case. And what I heard at the beginning of the pandemic, at least parents with intellectual disability or autism, they are faced many challenges when they are affected, and their children with intellectual disability cannot be taken care of. And the deaf people who want to access to support assistance, they face some challenge interact with doctors and social workers, and also people with other type of disability that when they access to medicines, they have some challenge. But for global GBDN China chapter, what's our role to respond to the livelihood and the right to employment and jobs for people with disability after this pandemic or during the pandemic, what they can do? This is something we keep in our mind. And at the beginning of 6th of February, we get some requests from the Hunan Disabled Person Federation, and they ask that it seems that the pandemic will take much longer, and during that process, if people with disability cannot get access to kind of psychology support and job counseling, they will face a lot of uncertainty and will influence their psychology, health, and mental health. So that's the beginning of our idea. And then we interview around 50 people with disability in Wuhan, Hubei, and Hunan province. They are very close to each other. And we find that nearly 60% of our interviewees, they lost their job during the pandemic. And nearly most of them will fear that they will lose the job after the pandemic. So that gives us a very urgent message that we should do something on that. That's why at the beginning, we joined hands with about 17 NGOs and the Hunan Disabled Person Federation to develop an online course called it's based on our previous project with Standard Chartered Bank. It's named the Road to Inclusion. We have some online courses, but we are not ready to make it public at that time. But the pandemic gave us very kind of urgent alert. We should do it right now. So during that few weeks, we developed 59 online courses. Most of them is about softer skills, how to interact with your coworkers, and how to prepare kind of interviews, online jobs, something like that. And at this moment, these online courses have got about 50,000 people go online and learn on that. And this is the first development. The second development is that we collect jobs that people with disability can do at homes. So we collected 2,300 jobs. And at this moment, nearly 300 of them are fulfilled, and they already get income from the work online. And the third thing we do is we try to promote people's understanding of people with disability through online videos. So that's the beginning of our interventions. But during the interventions, we also have one kind of activity. It's called one-to-one job coach counselings. And at the beginning, we are not focused on any type of disability in its intervention, but there's one couple, one group is a HRD from a company and blind massage therapists, and they are helping each other to understand each other and the situation. And the blind massage therapy share a lot of challenge he faced about his shop and his uncertain future. So these cases report to our organizers, and we realize that, you know, blind massage therapies is an industry that only open to people with visual impairment in China, and they have very little vocational options beyond that. So which means that if the blind massage industry is hit by the pandemic, nearly most of the people who work in this industry, they will lose their other option in life. So that's why immediately we start another campaign to support blind massage therapists to kind of increase their possibility to fight with the uncertainty, and other volunteers, they can provide other job counseling services, and also they can choose to learn from some other kind of senior therapists to share their experience how to make their service good. So this make it very popular in the last 1 month. I have to say it's very, very quick that nearly 1 million people touched on the we call it a live broadcast, and 6 of them they are very senior or kind of welcoming therapists. They share how to support protect your health during the pandemic. They are all blind massage therapists, and they teach non-disabled persons about how to keep them fit. So this is very popular during the last months. And the second quite interesting hit is that we train blind people to make video clips online and to share their concerns, share their stories, and most importantly, share about their kind of workability and talk about their story. And at this moment, each video will get around 5 to 1,000 praises and hit. So it's very kind of welcoming. And so
Haibin, I think you're finished. We were just losing you. There are a few questions that have come to you over our question and answer chat. So I will bring them to you at the end of the, as soon as the other panelists have intervened. But thank you for that a great testimony. Colleagues, we have 344 participants, so even more participants than the latest number we had in terms of people that registered. So we're really very excited about that, and of course it shows the relevance of the topic. Our third speaker is Yves Veulliet from IBM. He's the Global Disability and Inclusion Leader at IBM. He was the chair of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network last year, and he has been a great champion in the work of the Global Business and Disability Network. So Yves, over to you. Please feel free also to that we can see you on the with your video if you want. Over to you, Yves.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, a bit louder would help.
Okay. Is it better now?
It's good now.
All right. So sorry, I'm not going to turn my video on because, as you may know, the hairdresser are not allowed to visit people, and believe me, you don't want to see me with my hair right now. So I will thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share some of our solutions or best practice that we've been putting in place ever since this pandemic started. So I would like to insist on two aspects of the solutions that we in IBM are putting in place here. As you know, IBM is a global company, so we have to be, the major issue we have is to make sure that our policies and solutions that we implement are not only in line with the guidance or rules imposed by the authority of the country where we operate, but also flexible enough to comply with the cultural differences and the constraints that we may face in terms of legislation, etc., in a given country. So basically, I would like to insist on one topic here. If, as you know, in many countries, especially in Western Europe and now in North America and in Asia, the government strongly recommends, and in some cases imposed, for employees to work from home or at least to be confined at home. And so we, of course, as a matter of fact, it may be easier in the IT business than in other sectors of activities to propose a work from home policy to employees, because given the nature of the business, some job roles may be more appropriate, more doable to do that from home. IBM has a long tradition of accommodating people with or without disability to work from home depending on their type of role. So the rules right now in many countries and many regions is that unless you have a business critical reason to go to the office, we recommend that you work from home. There is maybe one more caveat, I would say, when it comes to making sure that our employees with disabilities can be as productive as when they work from home as they are when they work from from the office. What I mean by that is that some of us living with a disability may need some accommodations to be as productive as anybody else in the organization. And concretely, if you have a larger monitor because you live with a visual impairment in the office, how can we make sure that now that you are compelled to work from home, at least until the crisis ends, how can we make sure that you get the same accommodations in your home office like the one you have in your workplace, in the IBM office? And so we put in place a temporary procedure that we propose to the employees with the acceptance and the validation of our security and real estate and health officer. We propose to the employees to carry themselves their IBM tools from the office to their home. We propose them to do that within a certain time frame, so that we are sure that we can closely monitor and help them during the move. And for this is easy for items that can be easily carried out, like a monitor, like a software, like PCs, keyboard, etc. It may be, of course, it may be much more difficult with cumbersome equipments like ergonomic chair or big monitors, etc. That you may not even have enough room in the employee's office, home office to install. And so we are working now with our external vendors to make sure that we can find the best solutions possible for this temporary situation. And I believe what I'm saying here is of course true for all employees, but I believe that focusing especially on the accommodation piece of our inclusion work in this time of crisis is extremely important. And the second point I wanted to share with you here is that, of course, all your organizations know that, but in time of crisis, it's important to communicate regularly with your workforce, and especially for people when people are confined at home. And as I said, this is true for all employees without disability. But by definition, it's even more important for people with disabilities who may be, depending on their health condition, they may be more vulnerable to the virus. And so what we've done concretely is that we have opened a special communication channel using our, we use Slack. For those of you who are not familiar with Slack, Slack is a software application that is proposing real-time messaging for organizations and businesses to use. And this is the software that we use, the application that we use internally. And so we have created a specific channel for people with disabilities working from home, so that every time they have questions or concerns or any kind of problem related to their accommodation or to their situation in general, they don't feel isolated. And this channel is monitored by an HR professional, so that not only that we make sure that their voice get heard, but also we do our best to provide them with a quality answer. That's the 2 points I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Yves, thank you. Thanks a million for this excellent examples of what companies can do in this. A lot of questions are coming in. Thank you for that, colleagues. We are answering some of those. Some will be forwarded to the panelists. It's clear many people are mentioning the whole issue of making telework accessible. Are we moving towards the new new era where telework will become much more frequent than it is now? Probably yes. The only caution we would always say from the disability side is that we should not see telework as the magic solution for the employment of persons with disabilities. We had some of those discussions some some decades ago. But of course, telework is there for persons with disabilities. I'm now going to give the floor to John Messenger, another colleague from the ILO. He's a senior specialist on working conditions in the ILO, one of the top world experts on the issue of working time, and also a great expert on telework. John, before I pass, I will pass the floor to you in a minute. Just want you to include in your comments some reflection also on the mental health element, because that is one of the concerns that are being expressed, is what is happening with mental health. It is not something exclusive for persons with disabilities, but of course, I think it's something that is of interest and of concern to all of us. So John, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. As far as I can tell, I can't get video on here because I'm trying it, and it's telling me that it's unable to work.
No worries, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, you can hear me fine. Okay, well, thank you, Stefan, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group. Didn't realize it would be quite so huge, but so much the better to get out the message. This is an issue, teleworking, that I've been working on for a very, very long time. Starting when I was with the U.S. Department of Labor back in the 80s and 90s, and we were probably practicing it at least on an ad hoc basis before a lot of other people were. So it's something I've seen evolve over time. Don't have time to talk about all that, but I would just say that I think it's terrific that you're having this discussion, and I thank you for including me in it. Because even though I'm not talking about something that's specific to individuals with disabilities, I mean, obviously this is an important mechanism, certainly not the only mechanism, but a way of helping individuals with disabilities to gain and retain employment. This is something that's actually discussed in my new book called Telework in the 21st Century. It's one of the specific kinds of responses that telework is used for. It's used for various different things. Interestingly, telework got a big boost in the US in the year 2000 from the avian flu pandemic. And it was then that it was recognized as a mechanism for actually business continuity, for keeping business and of course government organizations too functioning in the context of crises. Both of these issues are talked about in my book. It's amazing to me that all of a sudden these things have come back in such a profound way. It's really unfortunate, of course, terrible toll that this is taking on people. But at the same time, I think it is also something we can take as an opportunity, because there's been a lot of resistance to teleworking. And this isn't good for anybody, really, and certainly not for individuals with disabilities if this is really one of their only options. So let me just quickly say that I think it's important that we keep this in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, but at the same time, the effective teleworking practices, what makes telework work well, is pretty much the same. It's a little bit different when you're doing it full-time versus part of the time, but I'm going to try to hit on those points as succinctly as I can, and of course I'm open for questions later. But it is a little bit different animal when you're doing it full-time as opposed to doing it a day a week or 2 days a week or half-time, which is usually about that's usually the most optimal situation. And one of the reasons, as I'll talk about in a minute, is because when you telework full-time, your chance of becoming isolated from your community, from everyone you work with, your supervisor, and the organization as a whole, become much higher. That's the mental health issues that you're talking about. And the mental health issues often arise from this isolation. But I'm sure that's not something that individuals with disabilities are unfamiliar with. Probably they have this problem all the time. But these are the basic practices I've been recommending. It's also in the video up on the ILO website. There's basically 5, but then there's one thing that kind of brings it all together. The first effective practice is management support. From the top of management, from the very top, from the CEO, right down to the frontline supervisors. And why is that? Because research has shown, and my book also demonstrates, that managerial resistance to telework is a major barrier to this effective practice. Why is that the case? Because managers, particularly frontline supervisors, fear a loss of control. They're accountable for results, and they fear a loss of control because they're used to managing in a certain way, which is based on their ability to work with people in person or to work with people in close context. and not to do it remotely, which is a very different animal. But you need to make that work in order also to get them to be comfortable. You need a results-based management approach. That means results-based management, which we know in the ILO as well, is identifying objectives, tasks, milestones, and then monitoring and discussing progress. But you got to do it in a way that's not too burdensome. There's a tendency, I've seen it already in the crisis, to impose burdensome reporting requirements, which actually detracts from people's ability to do their work. So this is really, really crucial. Another thing is appropriate tools and training. This includes, for example, appropriate equipment, laptops. Sounds like a minor issue, but my brother, who heads up child care enforcement for the state of Oregon, said that they couldn't find any laptops to buy. A lot of his staff didn't have laptops, and they wanted to put in an order for laptops from one of their suppliers, but the state of New York had already gotten an order in for over 8,000 laptops, so they didn't have any more left. So this is another issue. If you don't have the infrastructure in place, it's hard to get it in place on a moment's notice. You need good apps for teleworking. Adequate tech support is crucial, and training for both managers and teleworkers on how to do this, which we really didn't have a chance to do because we moved so quickly into full-time telework mode. And as I said, there's a real risk of social isolation associated with full-time teleworking that you don't have with part-time 1 or 2 days a week teleworking. And for that, you need to make every effort to help teleworkers stay connected with supervisors, colleagues in the organization. This requires good communications tools, but this also requires being proactive. So, I mean, I can't emphasize this enough, and this is directly related to mental health issues because we know about the link between isolation and poor mental health and various kinds of mental issues, mental diseases and health issues. Clear expectations is another thing. Sounds very simple, but it's not. Everyone has to be clear about the results teleworkers are supposed to achieve, what their conditions of employment are, which should be the same as normal, as similar as they can be, hours of contactability, how to monitor progress and report results, as I discussed before. And for that, it's crucial to set clear ground rules. And particularly when workers are or not available for work, that's crucial. Set those rules, have a clear understanding of availability, and respect those rules, because you have to be able to disconnect. And if you don't, that has negative effects later. And that affects not only your personal life, that also affects your productivity and performance for your company or organization. Then there's something called time sovereignty. That's a fancy research expression we use, which simply means teleworkers need flexibility to do their work in the times and places most convenient for them. And that requires a real sea change in how people think. And now they have to be contactable during normal business hours, but that doesn't mean they're working straight through during normal business hours. They need this flexibility. Why? Because then they can schedule their paid work around their personal responsibilities, such as caring for children, elderly parents, sick family members. Big issue these days. You need that flexibility. You need to give people that ability, that sovereignty, that ability to figure out when and where they can work, what is best for them. And that gets you the higher productivity and performance that companies are seeking. Finally, you need a boundary management strategy. Even if you have clear expectations, that's absolutely crucial. But even if you have them, you need your own individual strategy for how you manage the boundary between paid work and personal life, because we know with telework, with any kind of remote working, there's a potential real danger of blurring between work and personal life, and this can have all kinds of negative effects on both on your work and on your personal life. So what you need is a dedicated workspace. That's not always possible, but it's ideal. It needs to be free from disruptions. You need to also have the ability to disconnect, as I said. You've got to disconnect at specified times in order to, be able to have the necessary rest and have time for your personal life. And without that, this just isn't going to work for anybody. Finally, there's an extra added ingredient that is the essential piece of everything. You need trust, because you just can't monitor workers and you just can't manage workers the normal way. You got to manage based on results, and you got to trust them that they're going to do the job. And managers, teleworkers, and their colleagues, they all need to trust each other telework simply can't be effective without that trust. Easy to say, harder to do, but it's absolutely essential for effective teleworking. That's basically what I have, Stefan.
John, excellent presentation as always. A lot of comments and questions that came over the Q&A box. People were in fact mentioning trust just before you were addressing it. Of course, the issue of telework full-time versus part-time. And as I mentioned before, no, it's definitely we need to be careful about seeing telework as the magic solution for persons with disability. It has a lot of problems, but of course, if it's becoming a mainstream solution like it is for people working 1 day, 2 days a week per home, of course, then that is also available there for persons with disabilities. And then, of course, we need to make sure that the adequate equipment, adjustments, and solutions are there that give people with disabilities the same opportunities to enjoy from that. From teleworking. We are moving on now to the next speaker. Thank you for the many questions that we're getting. I think we're also setting a record there. We have been trying to, I think we have received so far 66 questions. We have answered some of them, and a few of them I will be forwarding to the panelists, and some we will probably need to address more calmly also after the webinar. Our last speaker on the is Bela Gore. Bela is the head of legal and content at the UK Business Disability Forum, which is a very active and a very well accredited national business and disability network. Has been operating for close to 30 years. And Bela will give a bit of information about from a legal perspective around the UK situation, but I'm sure that many of the comments will be relevant at a broader scale. So Bela, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you very much, Stefan, and hello to everyone from Scotland here in the UK. I've got a hard act to follow going after everybody else, but as Stefan said, we give advice to employers and to business in the UK. And what we aim to do is give really practical, pragmatic advice to employers of disabled people, and also to businesses on serving disabled customers as well. So we're a not-for-profit organisation. We've been going since 1991. We've got about 300 members, and 50% of our membership is global. We are not experts on COVID-19 or pandemics, but I am providing guidance, and it seems that a lot of what we've been saying in the past has now come into its own, particularly about teleworking. So if we could move on to the next slide, I will just get into the guidance, which is the questions that we are getting. This is not guidance on staying healthy. That's coming from the World Health Organization, the UK government, and your own governments. So moving on to the next slide, I'm going to sort of share some of the questions that we've been getting now. Assistive technology. Yesterday, the Prime Minister of the UK announced a total lockdown. Some of you will be familiar with this, more familiar with this than we are. So we have been told that everyone is to stay at home unless they need to go out because they are a key worker. They have to go out for work. That is ambiguous, or if they need to buy food or medicine or to care someone. So the government here is still saying that people can go to work if they cannot do their job from home. And that isn't just if they are a key worker like a medic. So there is some suggestion that disabled people are being asked to go into work because employers haven't been able to set up teleworking. And really our advice is that that is not an excuse for insisting that disabled people go into work during this time. Most employers can set up remote working, teleworking. And we've already heard about a few options: installing software onto computers. there is an issue with licenses. Licenses normally go with the computer, not the individual. So the license will be for the home computer, and some employers are reluctant to buy another license. Talk to the providers about that. They are being flexible on there. Help your people to install teleconferencing like this, like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, both of which have said that they will be captioning very soon. Microsoft Teams is already possible to caption that, but it doesn't work brilliantly always. And remember good meeting etiquette. We're talking, a lot of people are having meetings regularly. We at Business Disability Forum are having a daily catch up. But good meeting etiquette is to have a chair, stop people talking all at once, and give someone who has a delay on their line, either because of their internet or because they're catching up. And there is a particular issue with people who are deaf or hard of hearing or hearing impaired. They may be using an interpreter who's already also logging on. They might be trying to lip read, and that is difficult when the internet and the screen quality is poor. Or they are reading and it takes longer to read. So do make sure that you don't exclude people who are reading, and that the chair goes round and gets everybody's point of view. We've had questions on sickness absence, and some disabled employees are worried that the absence that they take because of COVID-19 will be counted against them when this is all over, because they've had a high level of absence. We are saying to employers, disregard this absence. It's best practice, and in those countries where there is disability discrimination legislation, you may also find yourself at the risk of disability discrimination claims. In the UK, we've got something that has been recently introduced called furlough. The government has said that if an employer has to lay off an employee because there is no work for that employee to do, for example, if they can't work from home, then the government will pay 80% of that employee's salary so that the employer keeps them on the payroll. This is to stop employers basically dismissing employees because there is no work for them to do. There is one note of caution that I would say, if you do have that sort of furlough in your own countries, is that it shouldn't disproportionately affect disabled people, and there is a risk that if only disabled people are furloughed and therefore only getting 80% of their salary, that is a disability discrimination issue and a claim could be made. So if you have two people who could do the job, one doesn't need any assistive technology to do it and the other one does, if the person who needs the assistive technology to work from home is furloughed, that could be discriminatory. Moving on to supporting the physical and mental health, Stefan asked particularly about this. There are some really simple practical things that managers can do. Remind people to move. It is ever so easy not to move. Now, I have been working from home remotely since 2008. It's out of choice. So I've been a long-term teleworker and I've got lots of experience. The one thing I found is that unless I actually schedule the breaks and put them in my calendar, I don't move. I work straight through lunch. I work and I sit, and sitting is not good. Some people don't have any option, but if you can move in some shape or form. And do go out if you are allowed to, or at least open a window to get some fresh air. Employers, managers, you can circulate online yoga, fitness video links. A lot of these are now free. And in the home office, in some countries, you can get home workplace assessments done by assessors who are doing this via Skype or video conference call. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing to make sure that the home setup is safe. Now, I've seen some things like, use an ironing board so that you've got a standing desk and you can have it at your own height. It's an interesting idea. Be careful. Ironing boards aren't always that stable, and will they hold the weight of the monitor? And reminding people to sit in comfortable positions. It's tempting to sit on your sofa, on the floor. It can cause back problems. So do be careful about that. And the point that John was making about flexibility, if you are a teleworker, as a manager, it is tempting to make people work the usual hours, 9 to 5 with a break between 1 or 2. That does not always work. When you are working from home, people have got children. Schools here in the UK are now closed. And people are homeschooling their children. So sometimes people are working in the evenings after their children have gone to bed. Sometimes they're working early in the morning. And on emails, it's quite nice to have a little line to say, I am sending this email at a time that suits me. I do not expect you to respond immediately. Please respond when you are during your own working hours. It's quite nice to have that as a general signature. Mental health. People who are not used to working from home can feel very isolated. That's been mentioned already. And if you're not inclusive with your technology, for example, for people with visual impairments, hearing impairments, learning disabilities, autism, then there is a risk that these people will be even more isolated. Remember too that people are different, and remember that you are different. Some people can't switch off. They keep working those boundaries that John talked about. Others find a lack of routine really difficult. They had their routine in the workplace and this is a change, and that can be very distressing. As managers, please be mindful of that and help and support people through that. And there's lots of blogs out there on the internet on working from home, what you should do and what you shouldn't do, how you should get up, you should never be in your pajamas, you should wear your work clothes. It's well-intentioned. What I would say as someone who's worked from home for a long time, one size does not fit all. Find what suits you. And a lot of this advice that's very prescriptive can make people feel anxious. Find what works for you. You're not doing it wrong. Everybody does things differently. Some days you may need to be in your pajamas, and it's about what the output. Are you still being productive as you can be, and are you looking after your own physical and mental health? It's not about how you work, it's about what you produce, and it's not about when you work. It's about being effective and doing the job to the best of your ability. So don't think that you have to do things in a particular way. Again, staying in touch. There's lots of WhatsApp groups, Signal groups, Slack groups. They're great for, as I think it was the person from the ILO was saying, the IBM was saying, for getting in touch with managers and HR to get accommodation. But there's a lot of these groups that are sharing jokes and just keeping people included. That works for some people. If you like the jokes and you like the videos and the GIFs, great. If you don't, switch it off, because some people find that it's really distressing. They're being interrupted all the time. And I would say that about notifications generally on social media and your email. Have some downtime when you don't have any notifications and just can get your head down and work. And try to stop listening to the news on a rolling program and getting push notifications about the news, because that is making people feel very anxious. And I would say that not just now, but generally, when things go back to normal, this carries on. And this is an opportunity as well. It's a terrible time. It's a terrible situation. But it's an opportunity for employers to really get their act together on this whole teleworking thing, because it is the future. More people will be working from home, not just disabled people, but people across the world. And there is probably a suggestion, I think, that employers will start closing offices, closing buildings, because they are expensive, and that is something to watch if this whole teleworking thing really takes off as well. And finally, if you are an employer, if you are a business, on the customer side of things, it's an opportunity as well. We had a survey done here in the UK, the Clickaway Pound, that estimated that the UK business was losing £17.1 billion from disabled people who had to click away from inaccessible websites. They couldn't use the online platforms. This is an opportunity to get your act together and make your online and digital offerings accessible to people who use assistive technology, who are using screen readers. And that's not just where you can see and browse products, it's when you get to checkout, because that is the point. at which a lot of things are inaccessible and people can't buy. And some of the things that disabled people and other people need to buy right now are essential items that they cannot go out to the shops to get. So it's a real opportunity, but it's also best practice to do that. And I think that's my 7 minutes. So I'll stop for that. Stop there.
Thank you very much, Bela. Colleagues, we are it's just 1 hour that we are on the webinar. We still have 330 colleagues registered. I know many of you have schedules for 1 hour. I would like to suggest that we go on for another 15 minutes. So for those of you who can stay with us, please stay. Hopefully also most of the panelists can stay, but if not, no worries. I would like to start. I mean, we have received a lot of questions. We have been able to answer a few of them. I have a few that I will now share with the panelists, but there are also many that we will not be able to address in the coming minutes. We are taking careful note of all of those, and we will try to answer them. And our replies will go to everybody who has registered to the meeting. You will allow me to start with 2 questions coming from the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum has been intensifying its attention to persons with disabilities over the last year. Many of you know the Valuable 500 campaign, which was launched in Davos early last year and was sort of reactivated or had a second element this year. Now we were on a call with the World Economic Forum staff and Caroline Casey, the founder of the Valuable 500 campaign, on Monday, also to discuss collaboration in the context of COVID-19. The World Economic Forum is very active on that platform, and it's very important, of course, to get them also to visibilize the situation of persons with disabilities in the context of COVID-19. So I would like to share 2 questions that come from the colleague from the World Economic Forum. Perhaps, I think, Bela, you have already to some extent addressed one of them, but perhaps, Yves, I might want to put you on the spot to try to answer the question. The questions are not easy, and I think they are valid questions to all of us. No? And so let me read out the 2 questions. On one hand, the first question is, how can we make sure that the private sector sees this as a learning moment on the issue and builds on this once the crisis is over? So I think we have had some ideas around that, but I think it's a very important big question. Furthermore, how can we ensure disability inclusion is seen as integral to business in light of the recession? I think it also to some extent goes back to my opening remarks in terms of the efforts that we all need to make to ensure that disability inclusion is seen as an element of both of the short-term response, but also more importantly of the longer-term response that should address the impact of the economic crisis. So, Yves, I was wondering, can I sort of unmute you to see whether you can say something to those very important questions? Sorry, it seems I'm not able to unmute Yves. Yves, can you unmute yourself? Okay, this is not working. Haibin, I have a few questions for you. Let me just see whether I can unmute you. Haibin, you're there, yes?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, then a few questions to you. That have people were asking questions around what type of psychosocial support have you been able to provide to people. Colleagues were also very interested in some more very specific examples on the type of jobs that you were able to sort of maintain or match. And I think one very important concern, and I was also very much would like to see what your views on that is the situation of persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities, for some of which working from home is even more complicated than for others. So I was wondering whether you had any views on these different questions.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Stefan, and thank you for the question. Actually, at the beginning of when we're setting up this campaign, there are a lot of people with disabilities saying that they need psychology support and also job counseling. That's why we set up a one-to-one counseling sections for each people who have this need. Okay, I can open the camera. That's good. Yes, and we have at this moment we have 50 psychologists and also HR person who are familiar with job coach and job counseling, and nearly 50 people with disability get one-to-one sessions, and each week they will talk 2 hours to each other, and we find that it's a win-win situation, and people with disability will share their concerns and their difficulty in finding jobs, but also the volunteers or the psychologists, they also share some of possible ways, but I think both ways they learn from each other. So that's something we find it very useful. So after this, after 3 rounds of one-to-one sections, already 50 involved, now we going to develop an online platform that people can sign up and people with disability can share their needs, and we will collect the psychologists. They can donate or kind of provide volunteer time for them. So this is the first one. The second one is about how to match the telework and all people with disabilities. So we also have a group of job coach online. So they have experience to analyze the jobs and also to talk with people with disabilities. And before they signed up with the jobs, the job coach will talk with people with disability who are interested and to understand their interests and also their capacity. And then they will match this HR person and also the people with disability. So this is through the online support. And the third one is about people with intellectual developmental disability. At this moment, we only have like 2 cases who are involved, and both of them are represented by their parents. One is a mother who is doing some kind of handcraft making and also teach her son to do the same thing. So what we do is we support her mother and to give her some ways to sell this handcraft, and also this kind of income will go back to her sons. So that's the situation in China, Stefan. I hope that will work.
Thank you very much, Haibin. Colleagues, we have a few more minutes. I will ask now my colleague Jürgen, who has been doing a great job to prepare all this, and all my team. A big thanks to them. We are putting on the screen a poll that we are asking you to fill in. There's still 270 people on the call, so it will be really great to see whether to have your feedback. It's just, you have to tell us it's one click. Just tell us whether this has been worthwhile your time or not. I'm sure that there are many questions that we have not been able to address. People have raised their concerns, colleagues from Nepal, about, of course, the availability and affordability of IT equipment in that context. What shall we do with social protection? It's clear that social protection needs to play a key role in this context, and social protection continues not to be sufficiently disability inclusive. So I think it's an important reminder that we need to come up with better social protection solutions. People have addressed the issue of what about caregivers of persons with disabilities? It can also be persons with disabilities as caregivers. Again, situations that are additionally challenging in the current context. A lot of interaction has been there around accessibility solutions. A lot of attention has been on the issue around mental health. John Messenger, many of you, some have asked whether there's a possibility to have access to the ebook that you have mentioned. So we're going to collect all these questions and suggestions, because I think many of them were also very useful suggestions, and we're going to prepare something with that immediately. I also wanted to mention that we are about to launch we're still sort of struggling to give it the right name. It's probably sort of a urgent call for action, an urgent appeal that will come out more or less with a summary of the messages that come out of this webinar. It is really about visibilizing the situation of persons with disabilities in the current context, where we all know that there's so many other priorities, so many other groups, that unless we are not proactively vocal, unless we don't remind all relevant stakeholders, and I think we had a good variety of these stakeholders today on the call, if we don't sort of take it on us to reach out, to remind people that in the responses to the crisis, particular attention needs to be given to persons with disabilities. If we don't do that, there's a huge risk that the crisis will just make things much worse, and none of the sort of potential lessons that could be drawn from the crisis will be implemented. So thanks a lot for contributing to the poll. We see that with a very few exceptions, all of you thought that it was a very high or significantly high level of interest. We are pleased with that. We are particularly pleased by the very high number of people that actually attended. I think we had 350 was the peak of the webinar. We are going to share the recording of the webinar with all of you. We're also going to prepare a YouTube version of this, where we are also going to sort of fine-tune also the actual captioning. There are always things that might be slightly, and we're going to prepare also other language versions so that people can also see the subtitles, at least in French, Spanish. We rely on our colleague Haibin for Chinese, and we also try our best with Arabic, and we will also produce this call for action that we are about to finalize. We're also going to share that with all of you, and also make it available in different languages. I'm sure that we will be probably rather soon organizing a second webinar, perhaps addressing some of the questions we could not address today. I would like to thank again our 5 speakers. But in particular, I would like to thank all of you who have found the time to connect with the webinar, to share with us your concerns, your questions, your recommendations. Very important, because we really need, it's the moment for action. The tools exist. We are aware of how to make things disability inclusive, but we need to make sure that in the wake of the crisis, these issues are not sort of put on outside of the priority list and start to be forgotten. Colleagues, thank you again for all your attention. Please be aware that we are going to soon share all this information. Thank you to all. Have a good rest of the day, wherever you have been listening to our webinar. Thank you very much.